trillions of dollars of American money, thousands of dead American troops, troops maimed from the battle. We fought to overthrow Saddam Hussein and to rescue Iraq and to make it into an independent country. Well, guess what? It's almost ready to fall into the hands of the most extreme Islamic, much more extreme than Al-Qaeda. And Islamic militants took over Mosul, the second largest city. They've taken Tikrit, and Nero in Washington is still fiddling. Terry?
But what do we do now? You know, here we are in this crazy situation.
I've got a radical proposal. The Kurds are good people, and they have established a very pro-American, pro-democratic, free market economy in their part of the country. They're exporting oil and doing a good job. It seems like to me there are Kurds in Turkey and there are Kurds in Syria. Syria is falling apart, and these Islamic extremists are taking apart Syria and trying to call it the state for the Levant. So I think it's time to have an independent Kurdish state, and I think it's time for the Kurds to get together and declare a state before it gets much worse. And in the process, they would have massive oil resources. But these militants have taken over the major refinery, and they're on the way to Baghdad. I mean, the whole thing is just chaos. And the problem is that Maliki is a Shia, and the Sunnis in the country don't support it. And the troops, the Iraqi armed forces are just surrendering in droves. I just have never seen an army just totally collapse, and that's what's happening.
Yeah. Well, the army's on the run, so are Christians there. George Thomas brings us the story.
Nice picture.
Mosul and Tikrit have already fallen to the Al-Qaeda offshoot known as ISIS, the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. And there is little sign of resistance as the militants march their way toward Baghdad.
They control territory, they control border crossing points, they control oil resources, mineral resources, trade, income. They have a base in the middle of the Middle East.
And this battle comes after America lost more than 4,000 troops fighting in Iraq and spent nearly $2 trillion trying to help stabilize the country. But instead of fighting, Iraq's military is on the run, leaving their American-made weapons and Humvees in the hands of these militants.
They were at one time aligned with Al-Qaeda, but even Al-Qaeda says they're too extreme because they kill civilians.
CBN international correspondent Gary Lane.
I think it shows you that you can provide the most advanced weaponry, you can provide the training, but what do you do about someone's will if they don't have the will to fight? Many of these Iraqi fighters laid down their weapons, they abandoned their uniforms, you could see them lying in the streets. They don't have the will to give their lives for al-Maliki and his government.
Iraq's prime minister has asked citizens to take up arms as Iraqi forces are fleeing, but citizens are on the run as well. 500,000 people are believed to have left Mosul, including Christians. Nina Shaib, director of religious freedom at the Hudson Institute, calls this the end game for the cleansing of Iraq's Christians.
All of the Christians of Iraq have had to flee, or virtually all of them have had to flee north to Mosul and beyond over the last 10 years because of very severe persecution. And so now we're seeing Mosul itself being cleansed of its Christians. There's virtually no Christians left in Mosul, and all the churches are closed.
Shea is calling on the White House to take action on behalf of these Christians and innocent Iraqi people.
The administration right now needs to get humanitarian aid to these people. I'm hearing that from the Nineveh plain, where a lot of them have fled, there's only food and water for about 2 days. Beyond that, they need to appoint a special envoy for Middle East minorities.
Meanwhile, the Iraqi government has asked the U.S. to carry out airstrikes, but there's no sign the U.S. wants to get involved. George Thomas, CBN News.
George, we've got a president who doesn't have a clue about foreign policy. He knows how to organize as a, district, regional organizer for elections. He knows how to go out and make speeches. But you've got a big problem in Syria. You have a big problem in Egypt. You have a big problem in Libya. You have a major problem now in Iraq, and of course we have, beyond that, we have Iran and North Korea. I mean, this world is exploding, and there's no center. That poem, "Will the center hold?" Well, we're the center, and we don't have anybody in charge of the center. Well, we've got our news terrorism analyst, Eric Stakelbeck, with us right now. Eric, tell us about this, what is it named, Barghouti, the head man of this group. What about them?
Pat, he is a mystery man. His name is Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. Now, believe it or not, he was in U.S. custody between 2005 and 2009, Pat, in Iraq. He was in the custody of coalition forces. Then he was released. He's a real mystery man. There's only 2 existing photographs of this guy, Pat, and he's a guy who has stayed in the shadows. He reportedly, when he has face-to-face meetings, he wears a mask. He likes to remain completely anonymous, but the group he is heading right now, Pat, this Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, we'll call it ISIS, they are the most vicious Islamic terrorist group in the world, Pat. In Syria, they're behind crucifixions of Christians, mass beheadings. Even al-Qaeda has branded them too extreme. And guess what, Pat? Mr. al-Baghdadi is now the emir, the caliph of a growing caliphate stretching across major areas in Iraq and Syria. To seize Iraq's second largest city, Pat, Mosul, 2 million people, that's astounding. No Islamic terror group has ever gained that much territory. That includes al-Qaeda, that even includes Hezbollah, which controls southern Lebanon, and now the push is on to Baghdad. And I think we can call this group, Pat, ISIS, not just a terror group, they are now a terrorist army, and unfortunately, apparently, they now have U.S. military hardware in their possession.
Eric, you know, I'm really think the Kurds are terrific, what they're doing over there. They're Kurdish groups in Turkey, they're Kurdish groups in Syria. It looks like if this ISIS is going to put together disparate Islamic extremist groups, that they're reaching into Turkey, they're reaching into Syria, they're reaching across Iraq. Well, shouldn't the Kurds at this point of time declare themselves an independent nation and come together?
Pat, it should have been done long ago, and we as the United States should have recognized an independent Kurdistan. There's a lot of diplomatic concerns there, obviously, but I can tell you right now, Pat, the Iraqi government right now is putting feelers out to the Kurds. The Kurds have a really well-disciplined, well-trained fighting force called the Peshmerga, and the Iraqi government right now is talking to the Kurds about possibly putting the Peshmerga into action against ISIS. We'll see if that happens. Another key point here, Pat, when we're talking about the Kurds, this terror army, ISIS, has seized dozens of Turkish diplomats. Now, Turkey obviously has long-standing rivalries with the Kurds, so we'll see what happens there. But the Kurds absolutely have been friendly to the U.S., Pat. They've been a force for stability and a semblance of democracy in Iraq, and we should get behind them at every turn, without a doubt.
Eric, how did this all happen? You know, we supposedly left. Now, there wasn't a status of forces agreement. The president bugged out too fast. He was looking for a photo op. Well, I ended the war, whoopee. And so he got his photo op, but he walked out. But I cannot imagine why this army just totally dissolved in the face of a modest pressure.
Yeah, U.S. trained, right, Pat? U.S. trained, U.S. equipped. This Iraqi army literally laid down their arms. And by the way, about a year ago, President Obama gave a major foreign policy speech. And, Pat, he said, all wars must end. So must this war against radical Islam. Well, I'll tell you what, Pat, the jihadists apparently did not get the memo. We don't get to just declare a war over and then the bad guys walk away. This group, ISIS, right now, there's major caravans carrying hundreds, maybe thousands of their fighters, Pat. Again, they may have U.S. military. By the way, Pat, they also seized Mosul's central bank. Now they have hundreds of millions of dollars in their possession. They're on their way to Baghdad. And for Iraqi forces, and you think of U.S. forces, Pat, we lost, what, close to 5,000 men there, 32,000 injured, all that American blood and treasure. And these Iraqis who we trained are laying down their arms at the first sight of battle. It's really astounding. And for President Obama just to not leave even a token force there, I'll tell you, Pat, this is happening in Iraq right now. It's going to happen in Afghanistan as well, where the Taliban will come to power again.
We have drones that could zero in on some of these guys. Are they asking for our air support of some kind?
They are, Pat. Apparently, Nouri al-Maliki, the Iraqi prime minister, is asking for some kind of U.S. air support, and I think we should do it. And for an American viewer to say, hey, why do I care about what's going on in Iraq? Here's why we should care as Americans, Pat. Right now, thousands of Western Muslims, Brits, Germans, French, and yes, Americans are traveling to the Middle East to join this group, ISIS. Pat, just last month, an American Muslim, a U.S. citizen from Florida, traveled to Syria, joined this group, and blew himself up. So we've had dozens of American Muslims travel to Syria. And Pat, when they return to the U.S., these are U.S. citizens, passport holders, when they return to the U.S., battle-hardened, well-trained by this ISIS group, all bets are off. Then the U.S. becomes the target, and that's ultimately why we have a stake in this fight. No boots on the ground, but air support, I think, absolutely, this is part of our battle against global jihad.
How powerful are they in Syria? That situation is rather confusing, and we didn't come on the side of anybody in there. But how powerful is this group in Syria? Are they going to have a chance to topple the regime?
You know, I don't think that's going to happen in the short term, Pat, because Iran and Hezbollah, remember, as you said, Syria is kind of a mess. It's kind of confusing. But for people to understand, basically on one hand, you have al-Qaeda and ISIS. On the other hand, you have Iran and Hezbollah, and they're all killing each other. So I don't know that Iran would let the entire country topple to this ISIS group. But they've made major inroads, has this group in northern Syria, in eastern Syria. They're very close, actually, to Syria's largest city, Pat, Aleppo. So they've made major gains in Syria. So they control major areas across Syria and Iraq. And what they want to do, Pat, is build a caliphate stretching across Iraq and Syria, an Islamic caliphate. That's their ultimate goal. And, Pat, keep an eye on Jordan. If I'm Jordan right now, the Jordanians, look, not the strongest military, strongest central government. They're quaking in their boots because they're bordered by Iraq and Syria, where this group is on the rise.
One last question. Where do they get their money? I mean, this takes a lot of money to support an insurgency of this magnitude.
That's the big question, Pat. Now, we have this golden chain of donors of al-Qaeda throughout the Persian Gulf, but most of their money has gone to al-Qaeda. It's not clear how much of that major oil money and donor money is going to ISIS so far. Apparently, where they're getting a lot of their money, a lot of their funding, Pat, is just from looting and raiding local municipalities and local cities, like they did in Mosul. They raided the central bank, took hundreds of millions of dollars, raided government buildings, etc. So that's how they're doing it so far. But, Pat, they're hot right now. In the world of jihad, it's what have you done for me lately? And I got to tell you, al-Qaeda hasn't done all that much lately, and this group ISIS is conquering major cities, so those Gulf donors might turn their funds toward ISIS in the near future.
Eric, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, if there's everything that you ought to pray about, this is it. I mean, this is the first time a terrorist group has got major territory. They have territory now. They have cities. They have the administration of vast swatches of the Middle East. I mean, it is a huge thing. This is what the Muslim Brotherhood kept talking about, restoring the caliphate. Well, apparently this group of radicals, and they're wicked, vicious people, they have done it, and done it in a matter of a few days. You say, how did this possibly happen? Well, it happened, and it is a fact of life. And we've got to move fast or we'll lose it all. Well, the Obama administration could not reach a troop deal with the Democratic leaders of Iraq, but they had no problem reaching one with the Taliban. John Jessup has more on that story from our CBN News Bureau. Here's John.
Pat, the nation's top Pentagon official is standing by the Obama administration deal that led to the release of hostage Bo Bergdahl. Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel told Congress the exchange for 5 Taliban detainees was legal and defended the administration's decision to ignore a law requiring 30 days congressional notice for any Guantanamo prisoner release. He said it wasn't a perfect deal, but time wasn't on their side.
But under these exceptional circumstances, a fleeting opportunity to protect the life of an American service member held captive and in danger for almost 5 years, the National Security Team and the President of the United States agreed that we needed to act swiftly.
Members of Bergdahl's unit accuse him of deserting his post. Recently uncovered Facebook postings reveal he criticized military and government leaders shortly before he disappeared. The World Cup is the biggest sporting event in the world, and it kicks off today in Brazil. The host country hoped it would bring an economic boost, but as Heather Sells reports, locals have been sharply divided, with many saying it was a big mistake.
In the months leading up to the World Cup, disenchanted Brazilians have organized regular protests across the country. Their main complaint, Brazil has wasted $11 billion preparing for the Cup and neglected needs at home.
Answer these questions. Who will profit more, FIFA businessmen or Brazilian people?
Brazil actually bid for the Cup back in 2006. That's a time when it was much more confident economically.
At the time, Brazil's economy was growing well. Its government wanted to showcase the country's achievements and to really show how fast it was coming up in the world.
In recent years, though, the economy has sputtered, and Brazil's infrastructure and education system have lagged. Now the president is in damage control mode, promoting the Cup and everything Brazil has poured into it. And she's getting support from some who believe Brazil has the resources to fund the Cup and keep investing in its economy. Another payoff, the Cup could enhance Brazil's international reputation.
Most countries who host these large international sporting events don't really make money on them. It's really more of an opportunity to showcase their political achievements.
Trincunas says long-term Brazil is on track to succeed as a rising global power. And in the short term, he notes that the protests and complaints may fade as the excitement of soccer builds, especially if Brazil does well in the Cup. Heather Sells, CBN News.
Catholic groups in Michigan and Tennessee will not be granted a temporary exemption from the birth control mandate in Obamacare. A federal appeals court ruled that the plaintiffs are already eligible for an accommodation created by the Obama administration. But the Catholic groups say even that accommodation could make them complicit in a great moral wrong. The American Center for Law and Justice is asking the Supreme Court to take a case involving pro-life pregnancy centers. The pro-life groups are suing New York City over a law that targets their First Amendment rights. The law says any advertisement or any conversation with a woman in person must include 3 lengthy disclaimers in English and Spanish, something abortion clinics are not required to do. The groups must follow the strict disclaimer requirements or pay thousands of dollars in penalties. And Pat, these pro-life groups say this all boils down to a free speech issue.
Well, knowing the court as I do over the years, I think that we've got a winner on that one. And Jay and Sekulow and the team on the American Center for Law and Justice picked their cases very carefully. And this is one you just feel in your heart that the Supreme Court will come down on. This is any restriction on the freedom of speech is this blatant would incur the court's ire, and I think the plaintiffs will win on this one, and the ACLJ will notch up another victory, for which I'm very grateful.
Washington is still stunned after the surprising defeat of House Majority Leader Eric Cantor in the Republican primary. Lawmakers are scrambling now to decide who will take his place when he steps down from leadership at the end of July. An election to fill the post will happen in 1 week. Many believe Cantor's support for immigration reform played a role in his defeat.
The problem here was that Eric Cantor couldn't get away from talking about the amnesty issue, and that really hurt him.
CBN's David Brody says Cantor's defeat makes it unlikely that Republican leaders will be willing to take up immigration reform now. Graduating seniors at a Virginia high school defied a demand by the American Civil Liberties Union to remove a Christian song from their graduation ceremony. Students in Ewing, Virginia lined up after receiving their diplomas and began singing, "God Be With You Till We Meet Again." The song has been sung during graduation at Thomas Walker High since 1940. The ACLU warned school officials last month that the students should not sing the song because of its religious content. But they could do nothing to stop the student-led effort. And you can find more on the story at cbnnews.com, including a link to the local TV station which covered the dispute. And you can always get the latest from CBN News by going to our website at cbnnews.com.